Okay, so today we're talking about triphasic training. So kind of just an introduction on it. So the whole point of it is to teach athletes how to absorb energy, which most training methods teach athletes how to expel energy. Triphasic training is teaching an athlete how to eccentrically and isometrically absorb energy before applying it in an explosive dynamic movement. Most training methods focus on the development of explosive strength by emphasizing the concentric phase of dynamic movement. Cal Dietz and Matt Van Dyke found that, did I pronounce it wrong? Dietz. Found that the key to improve force production doesn't lie just in the concentric phase. They found that it lies also in the eccentric and isometric phase. And they found that you need to train it just as equal as the concentric phase. So there's the three different movements, which are eccentric, isometric, and concentric. First, I'll go over the eccentric. So eccentric movement is referred to as a lengthening phase since the muscle is stretched due to a load placed on it. Every single dynamic movement begins with an eccentric muscle action, which is extremely critical for power production. This phase sets in motion a series of events that preload the muscle, thus storing energy to be used in explosive concentric movement. And then when you train the eccentric phase, there's two physiological processes that contribute to force development, which are the stretch reflex, which is the most powerful human reflex in the body, and then the second one is the stretch shortening cycle, which depends on the stretch reflex. Also, the greater the velocity of stretching during the eccentric contraction, the greater the storage of elastic energy, which therefore an athlete who can handle higher levels of force through an increased stretch reflex will be able to apply more force concentrically. And then there is a few rules to get the maximal results and the most safe results for an athlete. The first one is to use large compound exercises, and this is because during the eccentric lift, there's a lot of stress placed on the athlete, so their body should only be able to handle about one compound exercise per workout, and the workout should also be performed early in the exercise while their nervous system is still fresh. The second one is to never use more than 85% of the 1RM. There is things coming out now saying that, studies coming out now that you can go above the 85%, but when they were doing this, it's saying, mainly they were thinking this because of the risk versus reward analysis, so they just say the risk is too high and that you could get the same physiological adaptation using lighter loads. So that's why they were saying just 85%. The third one is always use a spotter when performing slow eccentrics. Like I was saying earlier, it puts a lot of stress on the body. The body's being maximally fatigued, so it's extremely important because their body could give out at any moment to have a spotter there. And then lastly, it's always finished in the eccentric focus lift with an explosive concentric movement. This is because, like I was saying earlier, every eccentric movement will have a concentric movement right after, so you want to be able to train that movement equally. The bar might not necessarily move fast in an eccentric workout, but you still want them to be able to push as hard as they can on that concentric movement.
Alright, and now we're going to go into some of the isometric basics. So an isometric muscle action is just when the muscle doesn't lengthen or shorten, and that's due to the force of the muscles and the force of the external load being equal, so there's no movement in any way. And then Cal Dietz talked about being able to use isometrics for assistance in smaller lifts also. So he didn't recommend doing that in eccentric training, but he says that you can use it in isometrics. So if you want to use like lunges or a lot of dumbbell work, you can do that with isometrics, where he didn't recommend doing it for eccentrics. And then this is just a simple loading table that he had. It basically just shows that as the intensity of the load goes up, your sets and reps should decrease. And then once you start to get above 80%, the spotter is going to assist in the concentric movement pattern of all the repetitions for whatever movement you're doing. And then there are two ways that they talked about to increase force in isometrics. So what they're looking at is being able to increase the force as you transition from the end of the eccentric movement into the beginning of the concentric movement when you're doing a full concentric or reactive movement. And those two ways are through motor unit recruitment and rate coding. So motor unit recruitment, you're just going to recruit more muscle fibers during that time point to move the external load. And then rate coding is you're going to basically increase the speed that the motor units are working, so that way you can make that movement occur faster. And then Cal Dietz also had a couple rules for isometric training as well. First one is hit the ground like a brick. So what he's talking about with this one is you want to do the eccentric movement fast. So if you're in a squat, you want to get down to the bottom of your squat fast. You don't want to worry about lowering yourself. And then once you hit that isometric, or where your sticking point or stopping point is going to be, you want to stop instantly without any give, like a brick does when it hits the pavement floor. It doesn't give at all. The second one was squeeze your muscles. So while you're in that isometric contraction, you want to squeeze the muscles involved. So in a squat, you want to squeeze your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes while you're in that hold to maximize the contraction. And then always use a spotter and finish with a concentric lift. Those reasonings were the same that Kenna talked about with the eccentric movement. You're at high intensities, so your muscles could give out at any point. And then for the concentric, it's just the same thing she's talking about.
Now we're going to talk about reactive training or concentric training. So after all of the elastic energy that is absorbed during eccentric and isometric phases, now it's time to exert that in the concentric phase. So Cal Dietz demonstrates and discusses that just like eccentrics and isometrics, concentrics need to be trained as well, just as important. Because if you can't absorb all that elastic energy and you're unable to produce force during the concentric phase, it doesn't really make a difference. So it's very important to train the concentric portion as well. He mentions it's the sexy part of the lift. So muscle action is the muscle shortening, obviously. It is a measuring stick of performance. So whenever we do a vertical jump, 1RM bench press, we're always looking at how much we can jump or how much we can lift. So that will measure performance. Concentric phase looks at rate of force development as well. We want to recruit as many motor units as possible, so that way we can produce and lift as much force as possible during our athletics or sport. It should be trained as fast as possible, no matter what the load is, no matter what the intensity is. You want to try to lift that bar up, medicine ball, whatever it may be, as fast as you can. So that way it trains the body to produce a lot of force in a short amount of time. This is a basic rundown of the concentric loading parameters. Again, we start off with low intensity at 30%, all the way up to 97% of our 1RM. Once we get to the higher intensities, the sets still lower a little bit, and the reps decrease as well. So that way we're able to lift those high loads. The two categories he discusses during the concentric training portion of his manual is inhibition and disinhibition. So there are agonist and antagonist muscles in our bodies, and when we're doing certain movements, the agonist contracts concentrically, and then the antagonist will contract eccentrically. For example, if you're doing a cut or decelerating, you're doing a lot of eccentric and eccentrics as well. So training concentric movements will inhibit the antagonist muscles, and it will result into maximizing the rate of force development. So again, more importance on training the concentric portion of the lifts. Synchronization as well, he discusses in the manual. This is everything coming together from the eccentric, isometric, and concentric parts of the lift. And he discusses that even though, like I discussed earlier, you're able to absorb all that energy in the eccentric phase. Practicing it and putting it out in the concentric phase is very important. So he discusses that. And this will allow for us to move load with higher velocities.
All right, so now we're going to get into block periodization. CalDEE's programs Triphasic based off of block periodization. So basically all that is it's a concentration of workloads based on residual effects. And then residual effects are basically the time before a certain quality diminishes after you stop training that quality. I'll get into a little bit more specific of what that is later on. But basically, for block periodization, it's going to allow the human body to adapt to whatever that adaptation is faster, because it's only adapting to one thing at a time versus conjugate, which we'll talk about later. So this gets you to increase strength, for example. You'll be able to get to maximum strength faster using block periodization, because during that block of time, that's all you're focused on, that's all the human body has to try and adapt to, is to get stronger. So then some of the phases and what the residual effects kind of look like. There's 3 phases. Accumulation is the first one. It usually takes the longest to adapt. So it's 4 to 6 weeks long. And traditionally in this phase, you're going to be looking at aerobic endurance and maximal muscular strength. In this phase, it takes the longest, and it's using the most basic principles. And then, according to CalDEE's manual, aerobic endurance and muscular strength will last about 30 days without any type of training. And then you move on to the second phase, which is transmutation. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks. This phase builds off of accumulation, and it's mostly going to be anaerobic endurance, and then either muscular endurance or power, depending on which you want to develop. And then the third phase takes the shortest amount of time. It's realization. It only takes about 1 to 2 weeks to adapt. And in this phase, it's going to be looking at speed of both the body and the barbell, so how fast you can run, and then how fast you're moving the barbell during your lifts. And this is all based on residual effects. So accumulation is first, because it takes the longest amount of time, but those principles will last the longest. So like I said, they'll last about 30 days without training. Transmutation is second, because it doesn't take as long, but also those properties will diminish faster. And then same thing with the third one, it doesn't take as long to adapt to those, but they diminish very quickly. And then that's also not to say that during transmutation and realization that you're not working the accumulation part, because like it says, it takes 30 days, but if you're doing something that's longer than 12 weeks in this example, then you may need to do a strength movement or aerobic endurance movement during that, so that way it doesn't diminish during your block.
So now we're going to discuss conjugate training and why it could be used during triphasic. So this is attempting to train all qualities at the same time during each session or each phase of your lifts. Not all the parameters require the same amount of time to adapt, as we just discussed. So the issue with that is if you're training every factor at once, each adaptation is going to increase differently or at different times. So you can peak at one portion, aerobic fitness, for example, and then you could be lagging in the speed department as well. So training all the parameters at once could be good, which I'll discuss in a minute. But the most desirable way to do triphasic training would be a block periodization. So that way we can focus on different blocks. One last thing, inefficient and elongated adaptation phase and preparation phase. So training all adaptations at once, again, could take longer to reach your peak and what you want to achieve. And this is not good for sport or competition. And that's why, again, the block periodization is more desirable for these types of triphasic training. So when would we use conjugate training? This one of the ways you can do is with low-level athletes, something to build a foundation with, get their basic strength up, get their anaerobic and aerobic fitness up, speed, all at the same time. And it could be used in the same annual plan as block. It's very, you kind of slide it in, however it may be. And also, once the foundation has been created, now what? Then you can start going into more specific adaptations like block training, so that way you can fully take advantage of the residual effects. And when competition comes or game day comes, you're at your most peak performance.
So most coaches apply block training to their Triphasic annual plan, and there's 3 phases that Dietz uses it in: the 80% training block, the high velocity, high low block, and then the high velocity, low low block. Before a coach decides to plans it all out, they need to figure out when the team will be competing so that they can plan out which phases that they're going to be training throughout the year. After that, then they'll plan the time that each phase or each block will be training in. Obviously, the needs of each athlete is going to need to be considered while planning this, because some will require different stressors. So the phases that Yates just went over, that accumulation, transmutation, and realization. With the triphasic model, the accumulation block consists of general developing training and the muscle action training above 80% of the 1 rep max. Like Yates was saying earlier, that this stage is usually going to be trained a lot longer than the other 2 because of the physiological adaptations occurring in the body. During the transmutation phase of block training, they're going to be training the anaerobic endurance during this one as well. Biometric training can be completed in this phase to ensure that all athletes receive the appropriate stimulus too. And the training percentages are typically going to be lower during this because we're going to be focusing more on power rather than maximal strength like in the transmutation phase. And then last is the realization phase, and this one will occur right before our competition because those effects will diminish quickly, so we want it as soon as possible to when the athletes will be peaking. This block is going to be using lighter loads, typically less than 55% of the 1 rep max at high velocities.
Alright, and then this is a simple training table that Dietz and Van Dyke use for a week's worth of programming. So they typically do a 3-day split, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday is going to be a medium intensity day, is what they call it. So it's going to be between 82.5% and 87.5%. On this medium intensity day, they'll use triphasic principles, so they'll use the eccentric, isometric, or concentric portion, depending on what phase they're in. For Wednesday, the high intensity phase, since they recommended not going above 85%, and all of these loads are at least 90%, what they recommended in this version was to do only a reactive or concentric movement for Wednesday, since it's at such high intensities. And then Friday is a high volume or low intensity day. So high volume is during the off season, and then you can either do a low intensity or just cut that day completely during in season. That's due to the extra games and practices. It's going to place an extra load on the athlete, so we don't want to add a whole bunch of volume while they already have a lot of volume from their sport. And then, as you can see through here, this is sets for off season. We'll have 4 to 5, 4 to 5, and then 3 to 4. But in season, they'll drop the sets, but keep the reps the same. And that's for the same reason as why they don't use high volume in season, is because the athletes are already doing a lot of volume in their training or in their practices and their games. So we want to decrease the amount of total volume they're doing in the weight room to prevent any type of overtraining or overuse injuries.
Alright, so to piggyback off him, when we developed the program, we used that same 3-day template as Cal Dietz and Van Dyke. So I added 3 separate train days, an eccentric day, isometric day, and a concentric day. They won't be in the same week, but I just wanted to give you an example of a workout that we did. Like he said, first day would be a medium intensity day. The Wednesday would be a high intensity day, and the Friday would be a high volume, low intensity day. So this is an example of an eccentric day on a Monday. So this is off season, building strength. So we had a couple of, one thing that I noticed about this Triphasic program and other coaches is in his 3-day model, he uses total body all 3 of the days. So that's what I did here. We did a back squat, a couple of warm-up sets, and then we included that range on that medium intensity day that Zach discussed, 82.5% to 87.5%. So since it's higher loads, 1 set of 2 reps, 1 set of 1 rep, and 1 set of 1 rep, and they're all going down in a 6-second cadence. So we did the lower body, and then same session, we did upper body as well, according to Cal Dietz's model. And again, we use the same percentages because it is a medium intensity day, so I fit some exercises in that range. So that's the Monday. So the next one will be an isometric day. This is going to be on a Friday because, like we discussed earlier, the Wednesday is a high intensity day, so there won't be any triphasic principles on that Wednesday, just concentric movement. So a Friday, low intensity, higher volume day, as you can see, it is a 75 to 80% intensity. And according to his model, 3-second cadence down, and then the 2 seconds isometrics bottom. So that's how I was able to put the seconds on there. Bench press, again, we're doing total body each of the days. So higher volume, less intensity since it's a low intensity day. And he discussed if it was in season, we would decrease the volume dramatically or not even include it at all. But since this is off season, we did include a Friday isometrics day with low intensity. And then the final sample is a Wednesday, high intensity. So again, we discussed no triphasic principles during that high intensity day. So we had a couple warm-up sets in the back squat, bench press, and that range is 90%. Obviously there's wiggle room for intensities, but we kept it mostly at 90%.